Hi everyone, my name is Natalia Ortiz, and in this video I'm going to talk about the materials we watched for this assignment. These include the documentary A Class Apart, the videos about Japan's Chicano subculture, and Mexican American studies at Franklin High School. Also about the danger of a single story by Chimamanda Ngozi. I want to share my thoughts, explain what I found interesting, and talk about how these materials help me better understand the meaning of being American, also the purpose of Chicano studies, and how stories and culture shape our identities. Let's start with A Class Apart. This documentary tells the story of the Supreme Court case Hernandez v. Texas. The film really opened my eyes to how Mexican Americans face discrimination in the US, especially in the legal system. Back then, the law mainly focused on discrimination between black and white people. Mexican Americans were often legally considered white, but in reality, they were treated unfairly in their communities. For example, Mexican Americans were separated in schools, neighborhoods, or even like public places. They were also never allowed to serve on juries. One quote that really stood out to me was, "For over 25 years, no person with a Mexican surname had served on a jury in Jackson County." When I heard that, I couldn't help thinking, like, that's crazy. They were living in the community, paying taxes, contributing to other people, and they couldn't even participate in the justice system. And that really showed how deep discrimination was. The lawyers on the case argued that Mexican Americans were treated as a class apart. Even though the law didn't officially separate them, socially clearly they were treated like differently to other people. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court and they ruled the 14th Amendment, the one that protects all people from discrimination, not just like certain group. And I think what really struck with me the most is that this case happened years before the more famous Brown Board of Education case, which ended segregation in a lot of schools across the whole country. And it made me realize that Mexican Americans were fighting for civil rights just like any other group, even like if their stories weren't always told. Also, watching this documentary really made me think about what it means to be America. Before, I thought being American was pretty simple, just living in the United States and having like the same rights as everyone else. But the film showed me that being American is also about struggling for equality and justice. Mexican Americans were citizens, but they still have to fight for their own rights. This made me realize that American history, it isn't just one story. It's full of different struggles and voices. It also made me think about how many people's contributions get left out of like stories we hear in school. That's why Chicano studies is really important. It makes sure stories are included and remembered through the years. This documentary also helped me understand why Chicano studies is about. Chicano studies focuses on history, culture, and experience of Mexican Americans in the United States. Before watching this, I didn't know about cases like the Hernandez Texas, or all the struggles the Mexican Americans face in education and legal systems. Studies is about making sure stories like this aren't forgotten. It also highlights culture, identity, and contributions, which are really important to understand the entire picture of American history. Now, let's talk about the Japan Chicano culture video. This video was honestly one of the most surprising things for me. At first, I was like, wait, like people in Japan really care about the Chicano culture. But like when I kept watching the video, it started making a little more sense. Like the video showed that there are groups in Japan who really admire the Chicano culture. They are inspired like by fashion, music, tattoos, and especially all the low riders. And one person in the video said, Chicano culture is about family, pride, and respect. And that is why we love it here in Japan. And that quote really stuck with me. I thought, wow, that's exactly it. They're not just copying for the sake of a style, they're actually respecting the meaning behind the culture. And it's about values, not just the way that people looks. And I wanna share that when I went to Japan, I saw that myself. And it was kind of like mind-blowing because there were like so many people who love Chicano culture. I saw people wearing like the fashion, with this I mean like the baggy pants, the baggy shirts, flannels, and then all these hairstyles that women use and also men. And also I saw a lot of people listening to like old school Chicano music and even talking about like lowrider cars, because you can see on the streets they have like a bunch of lowriders cars just next to the street, and they used to hang out, kind of like when you go to El Centro in El Paso, that you see a lot of lowriders. It was kind of like the same, and I thought that was really cool. I also noticed that some people like added their own Japanese twist to it. They were mixing the Chicano style with the Japanese style, which created something unique and really creative. It made me realize that culture, it isn't static. Like it travels, adapts, and grows in different ways. It reminded me that even though Chicano culture started in the US, it can have meaning and influence all over the world. Also, another quote from the video that I like was, we don't just like the look, we like the story behind it, the struggle, the pride, and the sense of community. That really hit home for me. Seeing it in real life in Japan made me understand how culture can connect people who are really far apart geographically but share values and interests. It also made me reflect on how often single stories about cultures. Before going to Japan, I mostly thought Japan was just like temples, sushi, ramen, like anime. But seeing the Chicano culture embrace, like, show me how grown that one-sided view can be. Now, I'm going to talk about the video about Mexican American stories at Franklin High School. The program teaches students about Mexican American history, culture, and contributions, which I think is really important. What really stood out was how much it helps students feel connected to their own identity. Sometimes in school, you don't really see your culture reflected on what you're learning. and that make you feel like your story doesn't matter. And programs like this fix all that. Like they show students how important their history is, and they can feel connected because they belong to it. For example, in the video, students were learning about Mexican American leaders, activists, and also another artists who fought for civil rights. And one student said, "Learning about our history makes me feel like my story matters and that I belong." I thought that that was really powerful. It's not just memorizing facts, it's actually connected and realizing that your story matters. That program also talks about issues Mexican American communities still face today, like education challenges, discrimination, and immigration struggles. It's not just history from the past, they connect it to the present, which makes it feel real and relevant. It's kind of like giving the students the tools to understand the world around them and how they can make a difference in the future. Another thing I like is another student said, "We get to tell our story, not just listen to someone else's story about us." And I like it because it's important to hear like another perspectives. It reminds me of Chimamanda Ngozi about in the danger of a single story. You can just have one story define a whole group, and students sharing their own experience. It shows how diverse people lives really are. And watching this video made me think about how important it is for everyone, not just Mexican American students, to learn about these stories. It teaches empathy, understanding, and respect for other people's cultures. And finally, I want to talk of the danger of a single story by Chimamanda Ngozi. She talks about how stereotypes form when we only hear one side of the story. One quote that stuck with me was, the single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete." And this makes a lot of sense. Stereotypes might have a tiny piece of truth, but they leave out everything else. Every group has so many different experiences and perspectives, and when we only hear one side of the story, we don't see like the whole picture. And this connects a lot of Chicano studies because it shares that we are often missing little pieces from the mainstream history. For example, many people don't know about the Hernandez Texas, or how Mexican Americans fought for civil rights. And without these stories, for people to believe the single story that Mexican Americans weren't part of history or a struggle, which is not true. It also connects to my Japanese experience. I assume Japanese culture will be just something completely different, but actually people in Japan embrace the Chicano culture. And this reminds me that one story never is gonna tell the whole truth, and there's always more to learn. And finally, on conclusion, I wanna say that these materials really help me understand why Chicano studies exist and why it is so important. A class apart showed me the history of Mexican Americans fighting for civil rights. The Japanese Chicano culture showed me how culture can travel and connect others people across the world. The Franklin High video showed me how education about culture and history can empower students, and the Adichie's talk remind me to always question single stories. And personally, seeing Japanese people love Chicano culture it was like eye-opening. It reminded me that culture isn't limited by borders. People can take inspiration from it and even create something new. It made me appreciate how connected we all are through culture, history, and shared values. And this assignment also helped me think more about like my identity representation and why it's important to share many stories. American history includes many cultures, struggles, and many voices. And learning about all these things gives us a better understanding of the past, present, and like even like the world that we're gonna have in the future. So yeah, thank you so much.